Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market.
Good morning, David.
Good morning, David.
Great seeing you again. And good morning, everybody, to all our listeners, and welcome to our second podcast. And today we have some really exciting topics to get into.
Yep, it's amazing how much goes on in a week in this industry. It seems like we did the last one yesterday. It was a week ago, and there's been so many transactions, so many questions, so many issues. So we're going to cover some of that today. But what's happening? Give us a market update. What have you found in the last week? How have things changed?
Yeah, and this is going to really lead into some of the hot topics that we have to discuss today. But the numbers are really, really interesting, and what they're really pointing to is they're pointing to a little bit of a slowdown. So we're seeing the number of showings decline month over month, and we're seeing the numbers of offers decline by 18% from March till today. Now we are only in the 21st day of the month, but what the software I'm looking at is looking at the total months, the total days compared from last month to this month, and the number of offers is down 18%. And what that's leading to is the average price is also down from 1,208,000 in Mississauga. It's down to 1,193,000. So not a big decrease, but we are starting to see signs where buyers are just taking a little bit more time, offering less on properties, and it is having a slight impact on price.
And are you finding that more sales have come up, like more volume in the market? There's more properties coming online, as usually happens this time of year. Is that affecting some of this?
Absolutely. So 5% more listings month over month up to the day. And when you compare it to a year ago, we have quite a number. It says that we're up quite a bit for new listings from last year. So, I mean, it is definitely impacting our market in a big way. And I mean, I think the stay-at-home order as well is impacting. People are staying home a little bit more and not going out as much. So, we are seeing the numbers drop in terms of showings, in terms of number of offers as well.
Yeah, I think people are being cautious. I think there's still some excitement out there. People want to make the moves, and they're not putting it on hold necessarily. They might be putting it on pause to some extent, wait a week or two and see what's going on. But on our end, we're still involved in many multi-offer situations where we're being asked to review status certificates in advance because people are going in and there's multi-offers coming and they want to go in without conditions, and still going in with offers without inspection conditions and things that we talked about last week. So we're still seeing that. I don't know if we felt the slowdown in our office because there's still a lot of that going on. Overall, I can see that it might be slowing down a little bit, but I'm expecting that it'll probably be a pause and not a real hold because we're, April 20, we're in the late part of April. Other than the fact that it's snowing today, it's spring and people are generally out there and want to make moves in the spring.
100%. And I think as soon as the government lifts the stay-at-home order and the nicer weather comes, I think we're going to see a large move towards, looking at properties and making offers. But it also has to do with the price range as well, right? Like we're in the Mississauga market, and the statistics I have given you are just for the Mississauga market. So when your average price is over $1 million, people tend to take their time a little bit. When you're looking at the condo market in Toronto, it's a completely different price point, and there's a different level of competition as well for those type of properties.
Yeah, that's a great point because we tend to sometimes think of the GTA as one big area and everything is the same throughout the GTA, but it's really made up of so many smaller markets. Even when you break down Mississauga, you can't say all of Mississauga is doing this or that. You got to look into the different areas. and some are hot and some are not as hot. So I know you do that all the time in your analysis with your agents, and people are farming different areas and everything. But as a general comment, GTA is always strong overall, but you got to
Oh,
break it down inside and see what's really going on in the different neighborhoods.
right. And I mean, I have to again preface when I say slowing down, I mean, it's still a very, very strong seller's market. Like the
Right.
absorption rate is completely on, the whole seller side. But, we're not seeing 26 offers on the listing anymore. Now we're seeing 3 or 4 offers on the listing. Prices are still holding, but again, we're not seeing that crazy frenzy that we saw before.
Yeah, so it's taking a little bit of pressure on the poor real estate agents that are running around with buyers, and 26 offers, only one's going to be successful, and those other 25 people have to go find another property, and that's a lot of pressure on buyers, and a lot of pressure on the agents running around with them. But to keep prices up, all you need is 2 people bidding on a property, and it still keeps the prices getting pushed up.
100%, 100%. And, it really becomes an emotional decision at that point, right? Logically, when you look at a multiple offer situation, when you approach it from a logical point of view, there's boundaries, there's ceilings, there's lines that people draw in the sand that they don't cross. As soon as somebody gets emotionally attached to a property, all those boundaries, all those ceilings go out the window. People want to win, they want the property, and that's where we see some of the price volatility that we've seen.
Yeah, and then it leads into pressures too on buyers to waive conditions about home inspections, not have home inspections, rely on home inspections done by a seller if they can, and that puts a whole other level of pressure on them. And I know you experience, I know you get agents calling all the time saying, is this the right clause? Is this the right wording we should have? Can we waive it? Should we not waive it? What are you telling them to do?
Yeah, I mean, wherever possible, home inspections are absolutely critical. You have to do a home inspection. This is the largest investment of your clients' lives, and there are so many moving parts to how a home is constructed, and some of the issues that buyers can experience are extremely costly. So our number one job is to protect our clients, right? And the best way to do that is to make sure you have the right team of professionals surrounding you, and make sure you have a home inspection done so your buyer has all the information at their fingertips to make the right decision. And there's a lot of decisions to be made. Like, for example, if there's mold in the attic and you're involved in a multiple offer situation and your price ceiling is this, well, maybe your price ceiling comes down by $10,000 because you need to deal with the mold issue. Right. So it's all about empowering your buyer and giving them the right information so they can make the right decisions for their particular situation.
And then what are you telling a buyer after they've had an inspection and there's something they're just not comfortable with, and they're thinking it's not just about the additional cost that might be to fix something, but something just not comfortable buying a property where certain work has to be done and they want to pass, they want to get out of the deal. Can they get out of the deal?
Yeah, great question. Right. So we had a recent situation where one of our agents listed a beautiful home in South Mississauga, and where the seller was extremely meticulous in maintaining the home, and they had some water issues in the basement. So this particular seller hired a very reputable company to fix all the water issues, and it came with a lifetime warranty. Now, we had a conditional offer on home inspection, and the buyer's home inspector found that there's high moisture readings in the basement in that particular area where it's repaired. Now, the listing agent put him in touch with the waterproofing company. The waterproofing company assured them that the job was done correctly, that there's a lifetime warranty, that the lifetime warranty is fully transferable to the new owners. but the buyer still felt uncomfortable and wanted to go ahead and cancel the deal and back out of the transaction. Now, really interesting situation, David, because our seller felt that because they spent so much time and effort fixing the issue, and because it came with a lifetime warranty, that the buyer was acting in bad faith.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's an interesting topic. I just attended a couple days ago an annual Law Society conference, and one of the speakers' topics was just on this issue. He's a litigation lawyer who was, came back with that's what the discussion was, because generally in a contract you're going to have language in your inspection clause that it's going to be, it's in the buyer's discretion, in the buyer's sole and unfettered discretion, in the buyer's sole and absolute and unfettered discretion. So on the face of the contract, your agreement per sale itself, it seems pretty clear the buyer can get out for whatever reason.
Right.
But the law doesn't really interpret it that way. That there's great weight provided to the wording in a contract like that, but there's also a duty of good faith.
Right.
That's imposed upon a buyer.
Right.
So if they have a clause like that, it's clear if the buyer had a clause like that, so they can get out for anything, and they never did an inspection or did a not complete inspection, just looking for a reason, they're not acting in good faith. And even though they've got the strict language in the contract, they're not likely to succeed and get out of a contract like that. Okay. But if a buyer, did go through the full process and is really not comfortable with what they find, it really does come down to a subjective test and what the buyer's comfort is. It's not what most buyers would be happy with. It's what this particular buyer, and some buyers might have an appetite to go in and they'll take their chances. They don't care about the moisture reading, and they might spend some money, or they might be a fixer-upper themselves and they might put it in. They're fine with that. But for somebody else, that might be beyond their comfort level. And if they've acted in good faith by checking things out and having inspected, having tested, then the court would likely uphold their decision to back out of the deal. Okay. But it becomes a question of fact on each particular case. What did they really, really do?
Right. So it's a subjective test.
It's a subjective test.
Yeah, really. And so in this particular case, there was a substantial deposit, and, the market did shift a little bit, especially in this region where, houses in this particular range were selling for $2 million, and this particular house was listed about $400,000 cheaper. And these particular sellers did feel a big shift in the market in that neighborhood. So they relisted the house for sale. They hung on to the deposit to see what amount of the damages would be between the offer that they accepted and the new offer. And it ended up that there was a $10,000 difference. So after some more discussion with the other agent, they ended up releasing the full deposit back to the original buyer and just moving on. But very interesting situation in the fact that if the seller suspects that the buyer is trying to rescind or cancel the contract because the market is shifting and they do suspect bad faith, then they are fully within their rights to hold on to the deposit. There is an anticipatory breach where a mutual release was sent by the buyer agent. So, I mean, they are allowed to resell the property, and the deposit from the original buyer gets tied up in the litigation.
Right. Well, I think you got a great result on that particular example. The fact that they managed to settle it, the fact there was a decision to give back the deposit in this market, I think makes a lot of sense. There's the law, and then there's the practicalities. And, I generally give advice on the law, but we always have to be mindful of practicalities too. And, are people trying to buy a house, or are they trying to buy a lawsuit? And if you've never been through the legal process of going through a lawsuit, it's not a lot of fun. Even if you're on the right side, even if you ultimately win, it's not a lot of fun. It takes a lot out of you emotionally. It drains you. There's uncertainty to it. It's an expensive process. So if you can, anytime people come to a reasonable settlement, I think it's a great idea. Now, tying up a deposit, is potentially a really hard hard thing for a buyer to overcome. Okay, so if a buyer is not acting in good faith and the seller says, you know, you weren't acting in good faith and I'm not letting you out because I don't know what I'm going to sell this property for. I'm hanging on to your deposit. Because the real effect to a buyer in the short term is they can't use that deposit money to put down on the next house. So they might find their dream house 2 days later somewhere, and they don't have access to that money. They don't have their deposit money. So now they have to go to court. They got to initiate the process to try and get the money out. So it really hurts a buyer if a seller takes that position. Now, again, a seller has to be acting in good faith too, and they have to act reasonably in doing it. So, you know, if a seller does suffer damages and they do release the deposit back, they still, if they go to court, they can still get a judgment against that buyer and still sue for damages if they haven't provided a mutual release.
Yeah, but really important to bear in mind the fact that when you are representing a buyer and you are in these multiple offer situations, you know, one way to protect your buyer is to limit the amount of deposit that you get. So a great practice is to say, okay, you know, if let's say you want to give $100,000 deposit on a property, right? Then put $100,000 deposit, but in Schedule A, break it up. Say, hey, I'm going to give you $20,000 today, and I'm going to give you a further $80,000 on removal of conditions. That way, you're at least sure that you're proceeding forward. The house is exactly what you thought it is, and you're not giving the seller the ability to tie up $100,000 from day one if they are suspecting bad faith, or if you do want to cancel the contract and the market's shifting a little bit and the seller wants to dig in their heels, you're not giving them that level of power over the deposit.
Well, that's great advice for any buyer. You know, I assume you can't always get that, especially in a hot market with competing offers right now. But anytime you can do that, I think that's a great way to do it. That's certainly the way on commercial transactions that things are generally done. It's usually an initial deposit that'll tie up the property for a period of time. There's usually a due diligence period that can be a month to 4 or 5 months sometimes on a commercial property for them to go through the process because they might need environmental studies and things like that. And it's not only upon the waiver of condition that there's a further deposit or a bigger deposit. So there's a little bit less risk, you know, to the buyer there. But on the same principles hold in residential. If you can do a two-stage deposit, that's great. You're tying up less money.
And I mean, I think that's the whole, you know, that's one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast, is so we educate everybody in the industry of, you know, what the pitfalls are, what to watch out for, and, you know, really how to protect the best interests of their clients.
Yeah, no, it's so important. And, you know, having a buyer out there that's got no money left to put a deposit on the next property is never a good result for you. And, you know, so you have to be on top. You have to be providing the right advice to your buyer client.
Right.
And you have to be telling them you know, when they do have to act in good faith, they have to take steps. If they have a financing condition, if they have an inspection condition, if they have a status certificate condition, they have to go through the process of trying to satisfy those conditions. They can't say, oh, you know, I changed my mind. Let's just rely on the financing condition and just not waive it and get out of the deal. No, they have to take steps to get their financing approved. If they didn't, and if they're challenged by the seller, they're going to lose if they don't act in good faith.
So David, let me ask you this question, because a situation comes to mind. Like, let's say that a house is conditionally sold on an inspection and a financing condition. Usually what agents will do is they'll try, like in the normal market, they'll try to get the financing hammered out. And then once the financing is approved, then they do a home inspection condition. Mm-hmm. Would a seller be able to challenge a buyer in the odd case that financing fell through and they did not do a home inspection, they tried to cancel the contract?
Probably not. If they acted properly in trying to get the financing condition approved, and there was still time for them to do an inspection and they gave proper notice, they said, look, there's no point in us even doing an inspection because we've been turned down on this first condition, then I think it's game over. As long as they did act in good faith and they actually went through the process of trying to get the financing.
Gotcha.
Like, there's no reason to incur the cost of an inspection that they know it doesn't matter what the results of the inspection are, because they can't go ahead anyways, because they can't get the financing. As long as they acted properly in good faith and really provided all the information of the financial institution and really tried to qualify. Okay. Now, if the seller is suspicious, they're gonna challenge them on all that. And if they didn't really do everything they're supposed to qualify for the financing, and then they didn't even bother to do the inspection, it looks like they're not acting in good faith.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Is there any language that that agents can put in the agreement of purchase and sale that compels a seller to release a deposit if the buyer chooses to cancel the contract?
Well, the basic language is about the best that we can do. And that's the type of language that I was referring to before, that it's in the buyer's absolute and unfettered discretion, that type of language, which is what you have in most of your standard condition clauses, and you should check it. Because that pretty much says if they don't waive, they're entitled to the deposit back. And, and that should be the end of the story. And it is the end of the story unless the seller is suspicious that they weren't acting in good faith. If the seller has reason to believe that they didn't even go through the motions, they didn't even try and find anything. So you can't really improve much on that standard language. That language works as long as there's this other element of good faith. They have to do something. Okay, you can't have a clause on reviewing a status certificate and then never get the status certificate and review it and just say, I'm not happy with this, I'm relying on that clause. Okay, you have to review a status certificate, and you would probably have to, if you're challenged, you'd have to point out certain things in there that they didn't like. If it was a completely clean status certificate and everything was good and there's no issues, they're not going to get out of that transaction just relying on great language in that clause.
Right. Makes complete sense to me. What about language? Because I know previously our offices worked together on drafting language that kind of compels the buyer to give irrevocable direction to the listing brokerage for certain things to happen with the deposit automatically if there's a breach that occurs. Does that language hold?
Yeah, it generally holds, but any language like that would hold, but it's always subject to arguments that could be raised on equitable principles by the alleged non-defaulting party. And again, it just comes back to this bad faith. It should be automatic. Okay, the language itself should be good. That if upon you receiving notice, the brokerage will release the funds, and that's the end of the story.
Right.
Okay. Now, if before they release the funds, the brokerage gets a letter from the litigation lawyer acting for the seller saying, we got issues here, and I know what the language says, but we're going to challenge this in court and don't release the money unless there's a court order, then you're sort of stuck as a brokerage. Like, now what do you do?
Right.
So I know first thing you do is you call me and we have a discussion about it. but the advice, you're going to have to lawyer up as well with a litigation lawyer, and you're going to try and take mostly a neutral position, saying, my hands are tied. I've got the clear language here. They're threatening to go to court. If I release it, it might put our brokerage in jeopardy. What do I do? And at that point, it's, you probably are not in a position to release it, even though on the face of it, you've got clear, irrevocable direction to release it. So you're more comfortable to wait till there is a court order telling you what to do, or to pay the money into court. Instead of being in your trust account, you tell the other party, I'm prepared to put the money in court, leave us out of it. Okay, because you're just the holder of the deposit. Instead of you holding it, let the court hold it. But it drags you into litigation that you don't want to be in, right? So even when you have that good language, and that's the way it should operate. It should be irrevocable. It should happen automatically. And I would tell you, go ahead. If you haven't received a letter from someone threatening litigation telling you not to do it, I would be telling you, go ahead and do it. you could release it based on that language. But if you do get a letter, all of a sudden you're stuck.
Right. And we see a lot of these irrevocable directions in a really, really hot seller's market, right? Buyer is forced or compelled to accept language that they might not otherwise accept just because they want to be successful in securing the property in a multiple offer situation. So again, something to really watch out for and pay attention to as a consumer, as an agent, and as a listing agent as well.
Yeah. And we're always drafting that type of language into extension agreements. When we have a transaction that's being
Right.
extended, one of the terms that we want to put in, and not usually for if it's a day or two extension all the time, because there has to be a little bit of give and take. But for any lengthier extension, a lot of times we want to make conditional on there being an irrevocable direction incorporated right into the language that directs your brokerage, the holder of the deposit, that if we get to April 21st and it doesn't close on that extension date, then that day, the next day, they should automatically be releasing that deposit money without requiring any further documents, without requiring a release, anything like that. So again, we try and build that in, and I would tell you, go ahead and do that. Now, if a litigation lawyer sends you a letter, it might put the brakes on it.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that this is fairly new language, isn't it? I mean, it's not new language, but it's a fairly new practice that people are doing. And again, it's a reflection of what our market is doing up there, right? If a house was purchased 3-4 months ago, by the time we get to the closing date, the market has already moved up.
Yeah.
Right. So the seller is in a position that they're able to dictate a lot of these terms. Trust me, if the market was the opposite and was trending downwards, I think that would never hold water.
Well, and that happens all the time. We're looking at in a market right now where it's hard to determine what's the real fair market price of a property. Is it the price that people are paying, or is that an unrealistic price from an appraisal point of view? Okay, because the property would have been normally appraised at $1 million, but all of a sudden there's multi offers and it's sold for $1.2 million. So what's the real value of a property?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be a bank appraiser in this market, and determine what the fair market value is in terms of a bank from a risk perspective, because it's really what educated buyer and a willing seller, what the happy medium is. That's really what the market value is, but it's really tough, and it poses a lot of problems as well.
No, it does. And lenders, from a risk point of view, they're looking at it. Okay, it may have sold for $1.2 million right now. We're going to lend money on this, and 6 months, a year from now, if that buyer goes into default and we got to resell the property, and we're no longer in this hot market, and the values come down, did we lend 70% of $1.2 million, but we should have only lent 70% of $1 million? And if we're going to sell it now for $1 million, are we going to have trouble recovering all our money with interest and penalties and costs and legal fees and all that? So they're going to be a little bit on the conservative side in terms of what they're willing to lend money, and they want to lend more on appraised value than on the purchase price that the property sold for.
So what happens, David, if a buyer purchases a property that doesn't appraise? Are they still compelled to close that transaction?
When they've waived the financing condition?
Yes, they're in the
They
firm.
waived the financing condition, all conditions met, but it's still subject to the bank saying, yeah, we're still going to send our guy out there to do a quick appraisal. Don't worry about it. And then they come back after the appraisal's done, and they appraised it for something substantially less than what the buyer needed to close the transaction. So if they've waived the condition, they have an obligation to close. So now they're scrambling. Now they're calling up all their friends and relatives, because that's the advice I've been giving. Look, you still got an agreement. You waive the condition. You have to close. We've got that closing deadline. That closing date's coming up. You got to find a way to close. So we do one of two things. You look for other resources to come up with the money to make up the difference, and your clients are calling their friends and family and borrowing money where they can or selling other assets if they can. And if they can't, they can't close the transaction, they're going to lose their deposit money. They're going to be responsible for any other damages that the seller might be entitled to when they resell the property to somebody else. So it's a perilous situation. So we're always advising clients, when they think they've got their financing all done, make sure you look at all the conditions that are in there. Is it conditional on an appraisal? Is it conditional on certain other documents still being provided? Because don't waive the condition until you know that you've got all of that done.
And whatever you do, don't go and buy a new car after you bought a house that still, that still hasn't closed. Because if your credit substantially changes or your credit position substantially changes, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble as well.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's a moving target. It's what day are they taking a look at your credit, and what day are they doing an appraisal? Okay. Now agents sometimes can get involved on the appraisal process. I've seen this, quite a few times where an appraisal comes in from a lender and it's too low, and the agents go to bat and get in touch with the appraiser and say, maybe you didn't see all this information that I have. Here's some comparables. Here's what's going on. This isn't a one-off that it got pushed up. All the properties in this neighborhood have been pushed up. Those prices are not coming down. Look at the history of what's gone on. It's not been going on for, this market hasn't been like this for a week or two. This has been going on for a few months. And here's all the examples. And here's all the comparables. And we have seen appraisers go back and adjust what they're doing. Another thing, and what agents do sometimes when the appraisal comes in too low, if there's enough time, is you get them to another lender and try again. And sometimes you get a different result with a different lender and a different appraiser looking at a property.
Yeah, excellent points, David. I mean, people need to know what their options are, and even something as simple as going back and having a conversation, and it has to be substantiated in fact, right? Your conversation that you have with the appraiser. But excellent points. I mean, appraisers make mistakes too. They're people. Sometimes they don't have all the facts. Sometimes they're not experts in particular neighborhoods, and they don't understand the local trend of exactly what's happening in that neighborhood. And if you can give an outstretched hands and help educate and help lead them down the right path, and sometimes that's going to yield a really good result for your client.
Yeah, and sometimes these appraisals are done on a drive-by basis. They're not even really looking at the property, but the fact might be, no, you got to come take a look. We have a completely finished basement in this house. The one you're comparing it to that sold for less didn't have a finished basement. We've got a swimming pool in the backyard. The one you're comparing to didn't have a swimming pool in the backyard. Look at all the landscaping. Look at it had a recent renovation. The one you're comparing to didn't have a recent renovation. Like, there are factors.
Yeah.
Another point I would just make before I forget to do it is, sometimes the institutional appraisers, can't meet the price that they need, but there's a whole market out there for private lending. And that's been a really active business recently, the private lending market, partly because of these issues where people can't get the financing from the institutions because the values get pushed up. So the private lenders step into the market and they say, hey, we'll do it. We'll give you the money that you need to close this deal. It's going to cost you more. It's expensive because they charge their lender fees. They're charging a higher interest rate, but you'll get your deal closed. Okay, so you're going to private lenders. So that's what some of our clients are doing too. They'll go to a private lender, sometimes for a shorter term mortgage, like they're going for a 1-year mortgage. Maybe it's open for prepayment, so they can get their deal closed, and then they'll use that time to shop around and see how market conditions change, and maybe they can refinance with an institution at a lower rate at some point. So it's expensive, but it's a lot less expensive than not closing your transaction and being in breach and losing your deposit money.
Or not jumping into the market, right, and sitting on the sidelines. Because I mean, when you take a look at what the market has been doing year over year, I mean, we're much higher appreciation than 8%, right, which is what a lot of these private mortgages are getting, anywhere from 6 to 12% on the fees. But even those fees have historically come down, just because there's more competition. There's more people being active in the private lending space. So I'm seeing those rates come down as well.
Yeah, the more people have jumped into it because there's a need for it, and people have recognized it's one of the busiest growth areas in our law firm right now is private mortgage lending. And we recently hired another clerk and have her dedicated to doing nothing but private mortgage lending right now, and she's swamped already. And it's a big growth area in what we're doing, because there are different nuances, different things you have to deal with when you're dealing with private lenders that are different than the institutional lenders. So you have to be set up and do it properly, and it's timely. Every single one of these, we get a commitment in, it's got to close in 2 days, in 3 days. Because these are generally people that have gone to the financial market, gone through the institutional, they think they're getting financing, and all of a sudden something happens and they got 3 or 4 days before closing and they can't get their financing. So then they turn to the private lenders, and they're able to turn these things around and lend the money on 2 or 3 days. So we get these commitments in, and they're always a rush. Everything's closing in 2 or 3 days. So we have to be equipped to handle that. So we've got, dedicated people doing that. It's one of the biggest growth areas in our firm.
That's actually amazing. It's great to know that if a client is referred to your law firm, that you guys have the tools and resources to help them, not only in a conventional way, but also if push comes to shove, that you're able to help them through those tough situations as well and give them the right guidance.
Yeah, and we can even refer them and refer the agents to a few different private mortgage lenders, because they can do their own shopping around. We've got some, they're all really good, but there's differences in what their rates would be and their timing and who's got funds available and everything. So we've got to find a way to get these deals closed. Closing a deal is always better than not closing and having deposit monies lost and facing lawsuits. So that's what we work together with the agents. We're doing the same thing. We want to get transactions closed. That's always the focus.
I think that's a great topic for podcast number 3, is really what happens when the transaction doesn't close, and all the nuances and the legal ramifications, and what happens step by step when a closing date passes, and what happens next. I think we'll leave that for topic on our next podcast, just to give you guys a little bit of foreshadowing as to what the next topic is going to be. I think it's going to be really exciting and a great one.
Well, I don't know if you noticed, I'm wearing my Conquer COVID shirt today.
It's great on you.
Thank you. It's I wear it once, so just a reminder of what we're dealing with. And how do you deal with it on a day-to-day thing? How are you finding things? We're now like 15 months into this, and you're a business owner trying to run a busy brokerage, and we're in the middle of a pandemic, and you're a business owner. What are you doing?
David, it's been really eye-opening the last 15 months on what real estate means to Canadians, and how important real estate and how interwoven it is into their daily fabrics. But as a business, we've really pivoted and adapted. I think we did 46 webinars in 2020 online. We took all our training from day one. We went from classroom environment to an online learning environment. That's one of the biggest things at Sutton Summit Realty, is we really empower our agents with the right tools and education to really be leaders in the industry. Because I think it all starts with training, with support, and with information. We have never been more connected with our agents, and our agents have never been more connected with their clients. And I remember in the first few months, I think it was just so important just to reach out and have a connection and really teach our agents to do the same with their clients, right? Because everybody's sitting at home, nobody really knew what the world is going to look like. Nobody really knew what the landscape is going to look like. So just the simple fact of reaching out, picking up the phone and saying, hey, I'm thinking about you, and I hope you're staying safe. And one of our agents, Ash Alice, absolutely incredible. He sent out chalk for kids to like hundreds of clients, right? With like, and he did it on a weekly basis. He had sent out chalk, he sent out this, he sent out groceries, and you know, that humanizing factor was so important, right? So same with us as business owners. I mean, we really kept connected with our agents. We informed them. We over communicated what was going on, what we saw in the industry, how we sort of saw business, what they had to do to adapt, and we gave them all the tools to really do that in a big way.
Well, that's fabulous. And, you know, Ash Alice, the guy always thinking out of the box. Good for him.
He's
That's
incredible.
brilliant. And that's great. And it's amazing. You know, I look at it like, how lucky are we, David? You and I have talked about this before. We're in a pandemic, but we've been considered essential services to allow our businesses to stay open and operate. And we were a year ago, we were going through that uncertainty. Are they going to shut us down too? And you know, we have friends and businesses that have been shut down, and it's way harder. Like this is tough enough for everybody to deal with while you're able to be in business. And it's been a huge challenge. But I can tell you, I couldn't be prouder of my staff and everybody. Like, it's unbelievable how everybody has pulled through this. And I know everybody's dealing with emotional issues, and it gets to everybody. It's on some level. Like, how can it not? No matter how you're dealing with it, it affects everybody. And we talk about that in our staff meetings, and we try and talk about that, you know, privately if we see someone, you know, needs a little bit of help or something. But bottom line is, everybody has been staying safe. Everybody in our office is staying safe. We learned how to work remotely. We have some people rotating into the office, so we keep our offices open, so there's always some people there, but never to the point where we're going to jeopardize anybody's safety or to make anybody that is there feel uncomfortable. But we made sure that everybody can work remotely. And fortunately, we're in an industry that we can do that. So number one, we keep everybody safe. Number two, we try and keep everybody on even keel. And part of it is being busy. Being busy is the best distraction against the pandemic. You know, it really helps, right?
Yeah, I always say to all my agents, listen, if you're going through a tough situation, jump into your work, right? Because it's gonna help take your mind off of things, and it's gonna keep you focus.
Exactly.
Right, but I think you nailed it on the head. I mean, safety is number one. It goes without saying. You know, we have to take steps to protect our clients and to protect our staff and to protect all our agents. And you know, the industry has really changed. You know, realtors don't drive in the same car with their clients. You know, you have to wear personal protection equipment when you're out showing properties. We've even gone as far to recommend to our agents to put cameras in properties, right, as the listing agent, to protect your sellers. And you know, the camera is there to ensure that whoever is showing the house has the right personal safety equipment on, and more important, that you know, it's smaller groups of people, like you only 2 people in with the agent at a time. Everybody needs to be safe. You know, you can't touch as many things inside a seller's home anymore. So you have to take steps to protect your clients and yourselves and the staff. And you know, we really over communicated all those things at the very beginning, and continue to communicate those things to our agents. And they're really important if you want to be an essential business, right? Sometimes it's the one that ruins it for everybody. Like, there was a case in Toronto a couple months ago, unfortunately, where a house was listed with tenants, and one of the tenants was positive for COVID, and they continued showings, and you know, it made headline news, and things like that cannot happen under any circumstances. You know, I think the safety of the public, the safety of people is far more important than getting a sale or doing a deal, right? So we really communicate that fact to our agents, and you know, we have very high standards of our agents. You know, we were the first to cancel open houses even before the boards suggested canceling open houses. So things like that, you just really have to be mindful of.
Yeah, and the good news in the industry is, that example that you gave is a rare example, because if
Very
that
rare.
was happening,
Very rare example.
then the government would have shut the industry down and say, no more, going into other people's houses, and we got to, if that was looked at as being a source of contamination, but it's absolutely not. There's protocols that your industry has put in place, and they can show houses and people can see houses, and put these offers in, and we can get things closed, and we do video conferencing, and we've all adapted, and we were fortunate that we're in this industry where we can make a living and employ other people, and make people happy by being able to be part of the process for them moving up in the world and buying their first home, buying their second home, downsizing when they're ready, etc. And at least that part of life has continued, and it's continuing in a big way. People are looking at it even more so because of the COVID. They're looking for those changes. They want to live in the place that they really want to live in. They've analyzed that. So that's why we're in such an active market. We got to keep it going.
People have spent so much time in their house, right? And they felt so connected to the home, where, they're very, very quickly were able to determine whether it's the right house for them. And in a lot of situations, because of the amount of time the kids are at home, the wife is at home, you're trying to do work from home, it might not be the right house, right? So that's why we're seeing people are going out there, and they're just more connected to their home now more than ever. Yeah. I know we're getting short on time, but one thing I want to really jump into is business development through COVID. And the one thing we really have been telling our agents is that, people have been spending a little bit more time on their devices, just because there really isn't much to do out there. So it's easier to get people's attention on social media and online now more than ever. At least that's what we're finding. So don't be afraid of posting. Don't be afraid of really engaging with your audience. But the key is to have engaging posts, I think. But the attention is definitely there.
Well, we're seeing that as well. We have a reasonably good presence in social media. We get great feedback from it, from doing webinars and posting blogs. And now we're doing this podcast, and it all helps, from a business point of view, for business development. And, I encourage you guys and your agents to be out there doing the same thing. And they've got to have some good content, connect with good content, etc. And it getting your name out never hurts.
Absolutely. And make sure you tune in for podcast number 3 with David and David on real estate.
Excited. We got some good topics for next week.
Amazing topics. We'll see you guys next time. Have a great, productive week, everybody. And thank you for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Stay safe.
Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market and dive deep to understand the issues affecting buyers, sellers, investors, and businesses. If you love real estate as much as we do, sit back, relax, and gain an insider's edge to the exciting world of real estate. David Gorski is a broker and the owner of Sutton Summit Realty, a powerhouse brokerage providing guidance to over 180 realtors. And David Korman is a partner at Kormans LLP, a respected law firm specializing in residential and commercial real estate transactions, with offices located in Toronto, Mississauga, and Markham.